environment. It's about connection to other people, and how that issues in acts of justice and hospitality and kindness. So basically, it, like, on the sort of macro level, Breathe is a book about connection and interdependence and belonging and becoming more loving people. So in a nutshell.
So great. I just love this book so much, and so grateful that you invited me to be here on your launch day. I also got a copy yesterday on my doorstep from FedEx. Of course, I'd seen it before, but there's just nothing like holding it in your hand. And, you know, we've been friends for a long time, or not ages, but a while now, and we chat. I did not know about you making your own books when you were a kid. I never knew that. And so I just have to interject that I did that too. When I was little, there was a talent show at school, and I said to my parents that I didn't have a talent, and they said that, yes, you do have a talent. You love to read and write. And so they helped me write a story like on those little overhead projectors. So it just sort of dates me. But, you know, we have a lot in common writer-wise, but I think in terms of sharing faith with kids, we have a similar love for making the abstract real and making it tangible and something you can hold on to. So that's one of the things that I love about all of your work, but particularly this 3-book series, which I'm curious if there's a 4th book on this, but we don't have to talk about that now. But I think one of the things that you wanted to accomplish in this conversation, which I'm excited about, is how to take the book and the concepts of the book and then also make them tangible with kids. So could you share with us, you know, what ideas do you have for, you know, this book stands on its own. You can just read it as a story. You can use it in your church, but how would you suggest for anybody that's tuned in because they want to use this book with their kids or with their church? What kind of ideas do you have for that?
Well, I do have, what I'll do is to say a few things in general first, and excuse me, and then give some specific examples. So then there'll be something, as you say, something tangible to take away. So one thing I should say about Breathe, and the same thing applies to the other 2 books, is that although it's a very slim volume, it's fairly text heavy. There's a lot of words in here. So to sit down and read the book start to finish, I would estimate would take probably 15 minutes. So in terms of standard picture books, that's very long. So if you're working with very young children, it's going to be hard to get them to sit from start to finish. So what I would recommend is breaking it down into chunks. And it does break down quite naturally into sections. I've actually done that in how I've written it. So I think one effective way of using the book is to focus on a particular section, read that out loud, and then find some activity or activities to help extend those themes. So if you think of it in terms of, I guess, pathways that kind of lead out of the book, there are 4 main pathways, as I see it. I mean, somebody else might see and use it differently, but I think in terms of the first pathway being create. So using especially the imagery of Pentecost and growth as well, but as inspiration for art or creative projects. So, I mean, fire is the hard one, but I did think about candle making, because you can do that in so many ways. Some of them are as simple as rolling sheets of beeswax, or when my kids were little, I had those little tiny cutters, like mini cookie cutters, and you could cut wax shapes and then press them onto pre-made candles. So that was kind of a fun way of playing with fire. Lots of simple, lots of simple projects that use the wind to move them. So pinwheels, I mean, I have a purchased pinwheel behind me, but they're not difficult to make either. Banners, mobiles, origami boats. I don't know, maybe if anybody else, when they were a child, made those little walnut shell boats where you
I love that.
Well, I love them too. And that's the thing, that, I mean, they're so they're so old fashioned, but they're so simple and so much fun. And you got a toothpick and your little piece of plasticine in the sail. And I used to put them in the wading pool and just blow them around, and just fun. The other thing about Pentecost and art is this whole idea of kind of diversity and unity. So the many becoming one in some ways, and you can explore that theme with art projects like torn paper collage, for instance, where you've got many pieces forming one image, glass mosaics or tile. You could do that with paper as well. One time, this would be harder to do distanced, I guess, but one time in a congregation, we got a huge canvas and subdivided it with masking tape, and then had, created the one painting with people doing sections. Another fun one, connecting with the growing time, and I can't even remember where I saw this idea, but it's a Pentecost salad. So you have basically like little tiny containers in different households, especially now that we're separated from one another, and everybody's growing something different. So someone's growing lettuce, someone's growing a pepper plant, someone has a tomato plant, and you're kind of checking in with one another about the growth. And then at some point, hopefully at harvest, all of these different parts can come together.
I love that. That's so cool. Great. Oh my gosh, I love it. So I had a question, Laura. When you talked about the sections, how many sections are there? And
okay, I'm
like with the big subheadings, right? Like there's
subheadings. Okay, so first there's breathless. And that is this time sort of during Easter prior to Ascension, where the in the story, Jesus' friends are dealing with the shock of his departure. Oh, we're
going to get to see it. That's really good, because the reason I'm pointing this out is, since we're going to flip through it, is I think for Christian educators and ministry leaders, or even in your home, you could do this over a number of weeks.
Yeah.
So for people that were early enough now that people could plan this now. So if they did, I'm curious, how many weeks would they have? So you would have breathless.
We would have breathless. Which ends with Ascension. Yeah, okay, so there's the Ascension. Sorry, I'm pointing as if people can see me pointing. And then the next section is Breathe In. And that is Pentecost proper.
So you would do Ascension the week before Pentecost, maybe, and then do Pentecost. So you would start this 1 week before Pentecost, okay, and then the week following Pentecost.
Okay, so then Breathe Out is the third big section. And I would think you would have the option of breaking this down into subsections. So like there's the story of Saul/Paul and Ananias. And then that leads into the fruits of the Spirit and sort of an extended reflection on growth and change and transformation and all the things that are happening around you in that season. And I know that this is location specific. I mean, it depends where in the world you are, but, and then, because that section goes on quite far actually. And I'll say more about this in some of the examples that I give. Oh, and then there's a fourth section, Time to Grow.
Gotcha.
So there's 4 big chunks.
And I mean, I'm a pastor, and so I'm looking at this and feeling like you could even use this as a preaching series if you wanted to. Those would be great sermon titles. That's kind of niche. I don't know how many pastors are watching, but lots of children's ministers are. And I think, one of the things you and I talk about, Laura, is the need to simplify. We don't want to overcomplicate things for kids, and repetition is actually so good. So for somebody to say, well, I would take one book and use it for 4 weeks. Yeah, that would be great. It would be the repetition. It would not be too much. It wouldn't be, I think sometimes there's a movement in this space to try and do new things all the time. And we've got to hustle to get, but I think you and I both share that instinct to slow down with kids and to repeat. And so I love the idea of doing this book for a number of weeks and maybe making sure that everybody had a copy, like a workbook almost, that they could follow along and look at. If you were going to use it for 4 weeks, it would be very worth it to give everybody a copy, I think, so that they could follow along. So somebody said that you could use it for a number of months. Yeah, you absolutely could. I mean, that's the thing that I think we need to, I mean, that's a soapbox I don't need to go down, but to try and slow down and use things over and over again is a good one. You said something to me about prayer beads that you thought matched with the book. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, that was actually a good segue, because that was my second little pathway.
Oh, good. All right. The Spirit is with us, Laura. It's the Holy Spirit.
So in the book, the narrator talks about learning to pray with the wind and her breath. So lots of different ways of kind of expanding our repertoire of ways to pray. Bubble prayers, breath prayers, prayer flags. I talk about that in the book. One thing that I don't think gets into the book, but I am personally quite fond of, is these Fruits of the Spirit prayer beads, and I'll explain a little bit more about them. I'd seen something like this years ago. Actually, I think it was at an APSI event, but anyway. But then more recently, there was a First Nations elder who came as a guest to my children's elementary school. And I was there volunteering. So I came and sat in on the session, and he was talking with the students about the 7 grandfather teachings. And it was fascinating because he went through each of them. So let me, I was going to forget this. Oh my goodness. So humility, honesty, respect, courage, wisdom, truth, and love. That was it. And so to get the kids thinking, he took one at a time, and he had them think, okay, what does the word courage mean to you? How would you describe courage in your own words? What does it look like when someone shows courage? When have you shown it? When have you observed it and stuff? And the conversation, these were elementary school kids. It went very, very deep. And I was sitting there, very immersed in what was happening, but also thinking, wow, I'd love to try something like that with the fruits of the Spirit. So the idea behind these beads is that you just get, and you could do this with younger kids, with adults, with teens, whatever. I happened to do these with polymer clay, and my 15-year-old daughter and I spent the afternoon going through this exercise and taking each of the fruits of the Spirit and just talking with one another and thinking about, okay, well, what is gentleness, or what is kindness? What do kindness and love have to do with one another? Like, how are they distinct? And then we had this sort of lengthy conversation, and then went and made it more abstract and concrete at the same time to say, okay, well, let's try to visualize it. Like, what color is self-control? And we were wrestling with this one because I did this one other time, and my self-control one, I had all these bands wrapped around it, almost like it was in a cage. And this time I was very averse to that. I thought, ooh, I don't like that at all. So I made my patience bead in the form of, I don't know if you could see that, in the form of a nest with eggs in it. And then I echoed that same shape in the self-control one, because I wanted to have all of these different colors or feelings just sort of held rather than enclosed. Anyway, so my point is, it's a really interesting extension of the fruits of the Spirit. It's a chance to have a conversation and to think more deeply about some of these things. You can actually make something, and then once you've made the beads, then you can actually use them in prayer. You can create your own breath prayers based on each bead. Hold on. So it's kind of a multifaceted idea and fun. And I just have to show you this one because I think you'll get a kick out of it. that's Joy, looking
Sort
very
of
exuberant.
whimsical. I love that, Laura. I think one of the things that I love about it, there's so much to love about it, but I think, a lot of people, I don't know if they ask you or, you're in some of the same online spaces that I am. People want to do things for cross generationally and with different ages. And sometimes that can be a challenge to try and engage a 4-year-old along with a 16-year-old along with, but actually, an activity like that, you could definitely have different, if everybody is making beads, you could have some things that maybe are more technically challenging for teens at the same time that you have those big, really easy ones for the really littles that can't do the fine motor,
Yeah.
along with seniors, and everybody doing it together. And then sort of the conversation, a question like, what does truthfulness look like? What does patience look like? It's going to vary depending on the age, but you could have a lot of cross pollination, which is good. I love it so much.
Same thing is true of prayer flags, by the way, because I did at a camp one time, did that with multiple age groups, and the youngest kids were working with, I think, paper and felt, and then the oldest ones had fabric markers, unbleached muslin. But then if you wanted to get really serious
fancy,
about it, yeah, I mean, if you had a bunch of quilters.
Yes. Ooh, yeah, I love that. So good, so good. And I think there's also this whole growing time connection, right? And growing things. What kind of ideas do you have around that?
What have I got around that?
Maybe another book, perhaps.
Well, so I did mention the salad, and I know a minister who actually did with a youth group an online cooking course, and it was I don't know what they were making, but I know that a lot of the kids had never chopped an onion before. And so the minister had the camera on, like 2 cameras, I guess. One was on the sort of like a cooking show on the cutting board itself, and the other one was on his face. And anyway, long story short, I was thinking if you had the technical ability to do that, it could be fun to actually cook something together like a casserole and then have these things ready to freeze in case somebody needs a meal. And that's probably dear to my heart right now because I was actually sick with COVID back in December. And, I would get a text and it would be a neighbor saying, send the kids out, there's a meatloaf on the doorstep.
Oh my gosh.
Those kinds of things just, they create and nurture community. I also, in terms of growing, there's also potential to, take some of the sections in the book and do things like create a pollinator garden. In fact, that was one of the specific things that I wanted to say. Oh yeah, okay. So here's an example of one of these sort of multi-pronged approaches. So there is a section in Breathe that talks about, where are we here? Bees and butterflies. Do you mind if I just read a little chunk here?
Of course not.
Okay, so bees and butterflies visit our garden. We chose plants they love. Black-eyed Susan, echinacea, bee balm. Without these tiny creatures to pollinate our trees and plants, we would have no flowers or fruit. Imagine a world without blueberry pie. We need them, they need us. We are all connected. And then I go on, we planted milkweed for the monarch butterflies. These tiny travelers have had a long journey south. Our garden is a safe place where they can rest, lay their eggs, and feed their families. And then I make a shift. Butterflies are not the only ones that migrate. People do too. Some choose to move, others have no choice. I try to imagine what it would be like to have to move. What would I carry with me? What would I leave behind? What would I miss most? I hope someone would make a safe place for me. So if you were to read a section like that from the book and then want to extend that, maybe by using another book that talks about the experience of a refugee family. An example, this is one of my favorites, Stepping Stones, a refugee family story. The artwork in it is it's a beautiful story for many reasons. It's also bilingual, which is cool. It's English and Arabic. And then the illustrations are fantastic. They're by a Syrian artist. And when he was making the art, it's all out of stones. You can kind of tell from the, but it's not even glued down, because a lot of time he simply wasn't able to get hold of any adhesive. And he also didn't have a place to keep the art. So he would make it, photograph it, and then take it apart again. And that really struck me for many reasons. But one of the things that struck me is that my kids want to keep everything they make. So as a parent, especially of young children, it gets to be a bit burdensome. You have bins and bins of stuff. And I thought, what an interesting experience for children to maybe gather stones or maybe have them given to you, but to create art with it and then to have to take it apart.
Yeah.
Like, you can't keep it. And then what does that feel like to have invested your time and energy into making something that matters to you, but you can't keep it? You've got to let go of it.
That's a total spiritual lesson right there. And I think it's not just the kids that want to keep the art. How many parents?
Oh, I know.
So many parents are like, have the things under the bed, every once in a while, and you go through it. I love that. When was that book published? How is it easy to still find and get?
Yeah, I think it's readily available still. 2016.
Yeah. I've never heard of it, and it just sounds fascinating and amazing.
It's a beautiful book. And a lot of the proceeds go, proceeds donated to refugee resettlement organizations across North America. So it's a great book. Speaking of books, though, can I continue to cross-pollinate?
Yes, that's what I was trying to prompt you with when I said, what do you know about growing? I thought you were going to do this, but then it's fine. This is a good time now.
Okay. So again, on this theme of growing kindness, there's a whole lot in Breathe about planting, giving gifts of food, harvesting, making meals together. And I won't read that section right now, but anyway, so I have to say a word about this book here, What Grew in Larry's Garden. This was my first pandemic book. So it was my first pandemic. It was supposed to have launched on April 8th last year. And the launch got canceled, alas. But anyway, it genuinely does tie in with Breathe. This is not just fake advertising, because it's full of, it's based on a true story, actually, about a teacher who cultivated tomato plants and had his students do this as well. So they were growing plants, but then once the seedlings were at a certain height, the project got more interesting. They all had to identify someone in their communities with whom they crossed paths regularly, but somebody they didn't know well. They had to handwrite a letter saying, this is why I've chosen to give you this plant as a gift. And then they had to hand deliver it. And for a lot of students, that was absolutely terrifying. But some really interesting things grew out of it. So that's a story that I read about in my local paper here in Toronto and thought, hey, with some prompting from friends, one of whom is here today. Thank you, Heather. People said, this would make a great kids book. So if you're looking for another book that would help you extend those themes of growing kindness, of gardening, of planting, sharing food, gratitude, kind of paying attention to the people around you in your community, that would be a good one. And then simple activities, letter writing, starting your own seeds at home. You can't see it, but I can't actually move from where I am because there are bean plants attached to the curtain rod and cups full of tomatoes by my feet here. So
I love it so much. I'm writing a Lent and Easter book, and there's some growing in there too. And growing and gardening is such a spiritual experience. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is, for me, like how we label people. And sometimes we say, oh, so and so doesn't have a green thumb. And that's what I always said about myself. I don't have a green thumb. Somebody gave me a plant, and I started to take care of it, and it grew, and I was like, well, maybe I do, right? So I think this idea of teaching about gardening, our church has a garden that's what the kids do every Sunday for the whole spring and summer is go into the garden, because there's so many lessons. It's so full of spiritual lessons. So I've not read what grew in Larry's garden yet, but I'm going to now. And I love the connection with growing, and the growing time, and the whole section of breathe that works through.
There's a kind of awe that's part of the cycle of growth too, I think. Yeah. And I think it's maybe easier for children to tap into that than for adults. So when we watch them, it stirs that in us as well. I mean, even just watching seeds germinate.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yes.
It's like the most ordinary thing in the world, but it's amazing.
The one really practical one, since we're trying to throw out practical tips, that I just learned recently is cat grass or wheat grass. I had read, or some other Christian educators had said, that it's pretty hard. It's pretty hardy. And it's a good one if you're just learning. I'm not going to say if you don't have a green thumb, because I think that's bad labeling, but and it's really true. I bought some. It was fairly inexpensive too, and I kind of had forgotten about it for a couple of days, and it still just sprouted out relatively quickly. So that could be a little activity too, if you wanted a kind of a easy to not mess up one.
And the seed is easy to get?
It was for me. I got it online. So okay. I guess it probably depends on where you're at too. Like we'll have to have a webinar part 2 on growing things and the salad. I love that salad idea that you gave. And I just thought, if I had a salad that every member of my church had grown a different element of it, it would just feel so amazing. It would feel so precious. You wouldn't want to eat it. You would just have to put it on Instagram or something. So, well, let's see. I think we have we can do a couple more things, and then we might want to turn to questions.
Okay. Do you want me to talk about the watering flowers?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So, of course, one important part of the Pentecost story is words. When I say the Pentecost story, I should take a step back, because I very intentionally in Breathe told the giving of the Spirit in Acts and then in John. That was on purpose, and I think it's important. But anyway, so, but in the Acts story, of course, we have all of these multiple languages, and this kind of paradox of people's languages being diversified so that they can unify. But there's this, I guess, a sense of power, that language has power. And we all know that, right? Because we've all experienced the way words can heal and the way words can hurt. So I learned years ago this beautiful activity from a little book by Thich Nhat Hanh called Planting Seeds. And it works really well with Breathe, because it combines the power of words with this imagery of growth. So basically what you do is you create paper flowers as a visual symbol of the way our words of appreciation and kindness can nurture other people. So this, you have to do this in a group. So I've been giving some thought to how you would do this distanced, and I guess you'd have to get somebody actually to deliver some of these things, but everybody in the group needs a round circle of cardstock, and then enough of these petals for everyone else in the group. And then it works sort of like distributing Valentines when you're a kid in school. So you would write your own name on the center circle, and then on each of the petals, you would write something that you particularly appreciate about each other person in the group. So if I was doing it, I would say, I really appreciate Traci's generosity and her sense of humor. And then I would go around and do that for everyone in the group. And then somehow somebody would have to distribute those so that each person ended up with their center and then all of the petals that everybody else had written about them. And then you stick them together to form a flower. Now I've made this flower, but I did it a little bit differently. It says, thank you. And if you bear with me for a moment, I want to share with everyone what's on some of these petals, because I'm just really thankful for this day and this time. So my first petal is a thank you to John Sweeney, who's the editor of Breathe. He kind of caught my vision, what I wanted to do with this book, and gave the story a chance to become a book. Special thank you too for Sister Estelle Cole, who's been amazingly patient with me. I think, I don't know, it feels like thousands of emails that she's fielded. And she, she always believed that Breathe was worth sharing and did that with a lot of enthusiasm and energy. Another petal for the whole creative team at Paraclete Press, including Rachel McKendry, who's doing double duty today, both as host and as tech person. Paraclete Press, the team turned Breathe into a really, really beautiful book. And they did so much background work to help people see it at its best. All those social media posts and the endorsement quotations. And speaking of endorsements, another thank you to those who, my 9 endorsers, Deneen Akers, Wendy Claire Berry, Kathy Dawson Benton, Karen DeBoer, Grace G. Sun Kim, Jack Levison, Brian McLaren, Glennis Nellist, and last but not least, Traci Smith. Thanks to the Breathe launch team for all your support and cheerleading, for taking the time to write those much needed reviews. If you haven't done it yet, today would be a good day.
Today's the day.
Today is the day. And special thanks to Roger Hutchison, because he's given me a lot of encouragement and tech support when it comes to things like Instagram and just getting the word out there. Big thank you to Catherine Petersland, the illustrator of the book. I just think, honestly, I think her artwork is enchanting. And it really, as each piece was coming in, I was just, oh yes, I love this. Again, Traci, you get your own petal for being, listen carefully, the interlocutor extraordinaire. I told you. For you.
So we have to tell this story because it's kind of an inside joke, but do you want to tell or you want me to tell it?
No, you tell it.
Okay, so when we were talking about the launch and we were just brainstorming about your book, you said, well, I would do a thing, but I want an interlocutor. And I just kind of wrote back, I love that you use that word. Like, it's just so professorial, right? So I just feel like I've gotten like a resume bump for being an interlocutor, which I've never been. It was such a joy.
So Traci, for her generosity, warmth, wisdom, gumption, sense of humor, the whole thing. And for suggesting cupcakes, because I do have a cupcake behind me here.
Yes.
And my last petal today is for my kids, Miriam, Maggie, and Ian, for making the cupcakes, for being my best supporters and my best critics too, and for always being there to push me to ask that so what question. Because if I forget to ask it, they surely will.
Yes.
So I'm very grateful.
Oh, I just love that. I mean, I'm stealing that petal flower idea for.
Well, I stole it from Thich Nhat Hanh, so you.
So yeah, what book is it again of his that he put in?
It's called Planting Seeds.
Okay, I'm a fan of his. I have not read that one, but we read one of his books during the pandemic in our church, and now I'm blanking on the name. But such a great spiritual teacher, but so good, so rich. I've noticed that the people, the participants on the webinar have been sharing ideas, and if you haven't seen them, Laura, there've been a lot of just as we say in Spanish in my house, echando flores, like throwing compliments at you, like throwing flowers at you, just for all of your work and all of the things that you recommended. But I have not been keeping an eye on the Q&A. I think Rachel, I'm sure has, but I should probably say, if you have a question that you didn't get to put in the Q&A, you can throw it in there and we can see how many questions we can get to. So throw them in there if you haven't had a chance, or I guess you could also raise your hand too if you have questions.
And I should say, full confession, I've not even been looking at the chat because, to be honest, my brain just won't split that way. So,
whereas I've got the opposite problems. So I have been reading them as they came on. Yep. So you should read them afterwards.
Yeah, I'll be sure to send Laura the full chat conversation here, and I'm also trying to keep track of the questions coming in on Facebook, which maybe I'll take those first, because they're Kathleen, and I don't know how to pronounce her last name, so I'm not even going to try. She says, "What is the stick made of, and the flower, and how tall is the flower?"
Oh, the stick is just a dowel. And it is, I would say, about 50 centimeters. Yeah. Oh, okay. Let's estimate about 2 feet.
Okay. And she says, oh, she wants to see the cover of the book. Here it is, Kathleen. I can't share my screen at this point, but can you see the cover there? I'm too close. Yeah. There's the beautiful cover of Breathe for Kathleen.
Somebody also was asking who the author of Growing Seeds is, and it's Thich Nhat Hanh. I can't spell it from memory.
Here I can. Yeah.
Okay. I was just like, it's a hard one, because there you go.
There.
And it's Planting Seeds.
Oh, Planting Seeds.
Yeah.
Thank you. Here's a question. Linda Shaw sort of asked this question just as you were talking about multi-generational activities together. She says, what age range were you planning for, Laura? I think she probably meant specifically with the book, because obviously confirmed it's an intergenerational activity, but what did you have a specific age range in mind?
Yeah, I mean, the age range for Breathe and Look and Make Room is similar. And I have such a hard time with age ranges. I tend to think kind of in terms of like 6 to 8 or 9-ish, but then there's a lot of flexibility on either end depending on how you're using it. So an older child could sit down and read this book start to finish without a problem. But a younger child could manage to hear one small portion of it, like a story, and especially if that was extended in some other way.
Thank you.
So I hope that helps, Linda.
I think so. That's great. Catherine Lord, who has been very active in the chat bar, also is asking, she says, I wonder how Breathe might be used with Laura's Bible story book, Read, Wonder, and Listen.
Yeah. Which I don't even have a copy of that here with me, but yeah, you could certainly, some of the biblical stories from Breathe are also told in Read, Wonder, Listen, and might be interesting to read some of them side by side and compare them. One thing that Read, Wonder, Listen does too is it retells the stories that are told in Acts after the Pentecost story itself. Like here, I have the story of Paul and Ananias rather, but I don't really have an opportunity in a book this size to elaborate much more on the sort of the other post-Pentecost stories. So yeah, they could work in combination with one another.
It'll be the next book, Laura.
Yeah. I'm jotting down all these ideas.
Yes. Rachel, how many questions do we have? If you run out, let me know, because I got a list.
Okay, well, Kathleen is asking another very practical question. She says, who sells these? So
everybody.
Everyone. ParaketePress.com, excuse me, as my microphone pops, is our website, and that's where the coupon code for today, live with an exclamation point, will work and give you 20% off. And also, I know Laura and Traci and others were also mentioning the idea of many copies for your congregation, for the children or groups, Christian ed groups, we have bulk discounts on our website too. But obviously, we first encourage you to visit your local bookstore. And if they don't carry Breathe and you want them to, have them get in touch with Paraclete and we'll help them out. We have an international audience today, which is fantastic, obviously, between the US and Canada and England. So Amazon is probably your easiest, best bet to get the book quickly. Anyway, just so everyone knows that. And lots of comments, not so many questions. So go ahead, Traci, with whatever you're thinking.
I don't know. We'll probably wrap up a little early too. I mean, a lot of my comments are questions / comments are around sort of the process of the book and just wanting to, you know, take my opportunity to compliment you, Laura, about, you know, you're such a humble author and person. And when you said, you know, you said a while ago that there was thought put into, you know, which stories to include. And I just wanted to say, to make a comment that I think that's an understatement. I think that you put an incredible amount of thought. Anybody that writes knows that the structure is something that's invisible sometimes to the readers, but I definitely notice it. And I think it's just flawless. It's masterful. The writing and the way that it's laid out for children is just, yeah. And so I guess my question, just out of my own curiosity, is how did you write it? Did you write it in little dribs and drabs and then put it together? Or did you have an idea of where you wanted to go with it and then you filled in the blanks, or is it a secret?
No, it's definitely not a secret. Sorry, the phone's going to ring. I definitely have to have a very clear structure and an outline in mind before I can fill that in. I'm not somebody who I can't just let something evolve. Mm-hmm. I need to have a map. And sometimes I will literally draw a map. Mm-hmm. The challenge for this one was that because I'd already written these 2 other books, and I knew that this was going to be a companion to them, I kind of had to figure out, well, I want it to sound somewhat similar, and yet it still needs to be its own thing. And Pentecost is just, it's kind of weird. Like its place in the circle of the church year is strange. So with Look and Make Room, I was writing about these long seasons of preparation that then climaxed in these great days. But with Pentecost, I mean, there is no preparatory season really, unless you count Eastertide as the preparation time. And then of course, so you get bang, there's Pentecost, and then there's this half the circle is this green time that we call ordinary time. I mean, how unimaginative is that?
It's ordinary.
Yeah, it's ordinary. So I had to, it took me a long time to wrestle with, well, what am I going to do with Pentecost? Am I going to try to write a whole book just about Pentecost, which I mean, I could have done. But I also struggled a bit personally with Pentecost because it wasn't a huge part of my tradition growing up. And frankly, I didn't really like the story as a kid. Kind of freaked me out.
Well, there's all these weird illustrations of guys with like flaming hair, basically. I
know, and I mean, I was
creepy.
Not only was I introverted, but also quite shy. And the idea of having retreated to this safe space, and then all of a sudden there's this violent wind and fire, and the doors blown open, and everybody's thrust outside. Like it really
it's not introvert friendly story.
It did not appeal to me at all. So yeah, so I've been through this kind of deconstruction and reconstruction as an adult. You know, what do I have to say about Pentecost? What makes it meaningful to me personally? And what kind of, I guess what came out for me was thinking about Pentecost, not only as the climax of that promise made before Ascension, but then as the threshold to this whole other season of growth. So I ended up breaking the circle into 2 parts and saying, okay, that colorful half is when it's our fallow time. It's when all those stories fall into us and soak in there. And then Pentecost comes, and that's the day we kind of wake up and, okay, now it's time to get active. And all of those story seeds are going to germinate, and it's our job to bring them to life.
I think it's such a gift. I think it's such a gift to the church, and my own spiritual journey. Connecting to the Spirit is the easiest person of the Trinity for me to connect to. And, do you know Phyllis Tickle? Do you know who she was?
Yeah.
She had I don't remember if it was the title of her book, The Age of the Spirit, or if that was just something that she said a lot, but, her thesis or her idea that this is the age of the Spirit for the church, right? This is where the church is, and the ability for maybe even people outside of the church to connect to the church's story through the Spirit is a direction in which the church is moving. And that really speaks to me and resonates to me. And I think children understand that in many ways. And I think some of the ideas that you've presented that I also, have in some of my work about flags and banners and pinwheels and kites and some of these things, I think you do a good job of also not over explaining them, because we don't want to over explain our faith, because we can't, right? It's such a mystery. So just letting a flag or a pinwheel be a flag or a pinwheel, and then letting, trusting that children make those connections on their own. That's a great gift, I think, that you've given to us in this book. Can you hear the fire alarm going off in my background? This is like comical. There's a guy, I'm at my church, and there's a guy that's walking in the halls, and he's like, "Hello, I'm here to test the fire alarm." Literally. Oh, great. Perfect. But I think we're running out of time a little bit, so I don't know who has the last word, but my last word, Laura, is just thank you so much for this beautiful gift. I am going to use it as a sermon series in my congregation, because why not? And so I hope that everybody buys 1 million copies, because you need more than just one.
Here's a quick question, Traci, for someone who knows that you and Laura are going to have another conversation later on today. Penny says, I'm a premium TBT subscriber, but unable to attend the 2 p.m. session. If I register, will that one be available later?
That one's not going to be available later, unfortunately, but you can get in touch with me for details about that. All of my stuff happens live and is not recorded. I can talk about why some other time.
Okay, thank you so much. That's wonderful. Oh, well, as I promised, I'm saving the chat bar, which I will pass on to Laura and Traci so that they can see all these lovely comments and ideas, and we'll share those. And so just a reminder, again, the book should be available everywhere. Your bookstore, paracletepress.com with that coupon code LIVE with the exclamation point, Amazon, anywhere books are sold. If your bookstore doesn't carry it, have them get in touch with Paraclete. We love to help them. And it's also a Kindle ebook. So if you can't get your hands on a physical copy, you can get the digital too. Thank you so much, Laura and Traci. This has been a wonderful hour together. Yay. And we are praying for everyone around the world for health and safety. We wish you a joyous, spirit-filled, adventurous Pentecost and Ascension season, and ordinary time. May it be extraordinary this year, especially with all these new ideas and ways to celebrate and worship together. So thank you again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Everybody.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bless
Take
you.
care.
Traci.
All right, be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.